Around 11 a.m. on Wednesday, September 27th, 2017, 911 received a call from a man saying his 3-year-old stepdaughter, Ivy, was unresponsive after she had tripped and fallen. When emergency crews arrived at the townhouse at the 5300 block of Rundlehorn Drive in the city's northeast, they found Ivy unconscious and unresponsive. Ivy's mom, Helen Woodsworth, was still in her towel from the shower she had just taken, and her hair was wet. She was completely distraught. 27-year-old stepdad Justin Bennett told emergency personnel that Ivy had fallen off her bed and hit her head and seemed fine at first but was unresponsive when Helen got out of the shower, so he called 911. Paramedics are immediately suspicious of the story because Ivy's injuries were severe, and they transport her as quickly as they can to the Alberta Children's Hospital. Once there, doctors who have assessed her injuries are sadly forced to put her on life support and determine that there's no way her injuries were caused by any kind of fall. There were just too many of them. Some were older and starting to heal, and some were fresh. Because the doctors felt Ivy's injuries didn't match the story they were being told by her parents, the child abuse unit was called in to investigate. The timing of her injury and her being unresponsive and her living conditions told investigators that only people close to her within the couple of hours preceding her death could have caused the injuries, and that was Helen Woodsworth and Justin Bennett. Sadly, 8 days later, on October 5th, 2017, little Ivy Wick succumbed to her many injuries. The homicide unit became the primary investigators, and while the autopsy was being completed, put their focus on interviewing Helen and Justin. At this point, Ivy's death wasn't officially ruled a homicide as they were still waiting for the autopsy results, but it was already looking highly suspicious. The investigators know that Helen and Justin were the only two people that would or could have caused Ivy's injuries that led to her death. They also are pretty sure that there was a history of abuse before her actual death. There are quite a few photos of Ivy released to the media, including ones with her mom, Helen. Other than one of her in the hospital, which is completely heartbreaking, all of them show an adorable, smiling little blonde girl who looks tall for her age, showing off her teeth and with one of those smiles that wrinkles up her nose. In one, she's wearing a bright yellow t-shirt which accentuates her blonde hair, which is up in a single braid down the back, which appears neatly done with some expertise. The second one, her hair is up in a ponytail and she's wearing a coordinated velour purple pants with a pink shirt with an embroidered heart on it, with very cool looking sneakers. The last one, and probably the most used, she's standing in front of the TV in her family room, and this time her hair is up in a half do, with sprigs of hair spilling over the top of her head like in a sprinkler. She's wearing a red and white polka dot summer jumper. What no one seems to report on is the fact that, to me, it's quite obvious there is a bruise on her right cheek and a cut above her right eye. Despite this, she is still smiling for whoever is behind the camera. The fact that she is so well dressed and care is obviously taken with her daily grooming seems to contradict this accusation of prior abuse. But her injuries don't lie. Someone brutally attacked this little peanut, and the police are bound and determined to get to the bottom of it. But rather than start with interviewing Justin and Helen, they decide to first get their ducks in a row and talk to people who would have seen and had encounters with Ivy and her parents. Then they can go into interviews with them knowing what information they should be corroborating or refuting. But for now, they leave the talking to Justin and Helen to child abuse investigators, who report back that there had been a prior hospital visit that appeared suspicious. It would be several months before Ivy's autopsy was returned to the investigators. As suspected, Ivy had died of blunt force trauma to the head with multiple points of impact. And this is where information is really scarce. I know that Justin Bennett is not Ivy's biological father and that the bio dad was interviewed early on in the investigation but was not part of any further investigation, suggesting that perhaps he wasn't involved in Ivy's life after her birth. I don't know how long Justin and Helen were together. Court records put Justin at 24 at the time of Ivy's death, and Helen appears to be around the same age. It's not really clear until later in the investigation that the focus is on Justin rather than on Helen. And based on the pictures of Ivy with her mom, I would have probably come to the same conclusion. Helen appeared pretty loving in her pictures with her little girl, and the care that was taken with Ivy's clothes and hair and general appearance of good health for the most part would suggest that Helen hadn't beaten her child into a coma that she never came out of, and it was quickly apparent to anyone following the story that the story changed. First, she had tripped and fell, and then she fell off the bed. It just seems fishy from the get-go. Shortly after Ivy's autopsy was released to investigators, they were ready to hit the ground running and put together a case. Justin made a new friend, or rather a group of friends, and it's a good thing that his friends came along when they did because the poor boy was almost homeless when Mr. Big and his associates rolled up on him and offered him a job. Homelessness is usually next on the list when you spend all your time playing video games and smoking pot. So he was easily lured in with the promise of cash, $9,000 in fact over a 6-week period, for road trips to Edmonton and Regina for drop-offs of some sort. On September 6, 2018, Justin sat down with Mr. Big. Now, normally you are motivated to confess to Mr. Big because you have a reason to believe you might get kicked out if you don't fess up. Loyalty and honesty are most valued to Mr. Big. But in Justin's case, he went to Mr. Big because he had this nasty legal problem hanging over him that he wanted some help with, so that he could be free to stay in the crime organization and continue to make more money for them doing whatever they asked of him. He later tried to claim in court that after hearing that some of the members of this group beat up a woman that he wanted out, but he was afraid of them. But his father said that he was too deep in and needed to stick it out. But on cross-examination, he admitted that he was told by Mr. Big that he could dip out of here. He thought he would be out for good, but still wanted in. And when asked if he stayed because he wanted to continue with them or if he stayed because he was scared, he had this little tidbit to say. Well, at that earlier time, I was scared. Yes, that's quite a bit of a difference between then and the end of the organization. I wasn't reaping any benefit at that time. They were beating up that girl. I wasn't getting anything. After I showed my worth, they started buying me stuff, taking me out to fancy restaurants. So I'm getting stuff now. My life is turning around. I've seen everything that I can get. So what he tells Mr. Big is that he had a video game addiction, and Ivy, sweet little peanut, interrupted his playing one fateful day.
So, when she looked up at me after I punched her,
right, so you smoked her on the top of the head?
She looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, Johnny," and then enraged me.
Yeah.
I threw her up against that wall. And when she fell, I guess it must have been the final blow. And she got up. I saw it on her face after I smacked her head off the wall. She was pretty dazed. Couldn't walk a straight line.
So did you stroke her in the head after you smashed her in the wall? Or was that before?
It was before.
Okay, explain. So two? Okay.
Well, I punched her in the head.
Okay.
Like I told you, boom, right down on top of her.
Was she standing up? Was she already down? Or?
She was standing up. And then I walked over to her. Boom.
Yeah.
Grabbed her. Boom.
Okay, so hold on. So on that there, the first time you hit her, on top of that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard all of that clearly, but basically Helen had told Ivy to stand in the corner on that morning because she was misbehaving. Just normal stuff. So like a timeout. Then Helen went to take a shower, and Ivy's crying in the corner was distracting Justin from his call of duty, so he gave her a dirty look. And when that didn't get the result that he wanted, he went over to her and punched her on the top of her head. Quote, she looked up at me after I punched her in the head. She looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, Daddy," and that enraged me. And after she looked at me and said, "I'm sorry," I just fucking threw her against the wall. Fuck your sorry, basically. I threw her up against the wall. I basically grabbed her by the side of the head and just pushed her. I pushed her pretty hard. I snapped. She was dazed. She looked at me. I could see the dazed look in her face, but was able to get up at that point. She got fucked up. I saw it on her face after I smacked her head off the wall. She was pretty dazed. Couldn't walk a straight line. He said Ivy stood up and was screaming, and Helen called out from her shower to go to her room, obviously not realizing what was happening. As she started to walk, Bennett said he purposely tripped her. He said, quote, she smashed her head again. Justin then said that while Ivy struck her head on the hardwood floor, she was able to run to her bedroom. But when he went in to check on her, she was lying on the floor unconscious. As for his warped reasoning for his actions, he said he never actually lost his temper with his own son, but for some reason with Ivy, I couldn't control myself sometimes. She was just so fucking ungrateful all the time. Quote, I have like kind of a hate on towards her. I was tired of it. So tired of taking care of an ungrateful kid, one that doesn't fucking respect anything. And he also admitted that it wasn't the first time that he had acted like a baboon with this young precious child, saying, I fucking smacked her around a couple of times. He, of course, never told anyone what he had done, leaving Helen to be crucified in the media as a suspected culprit, and leaving her to think that he was just a regular old grief-stricken dad. Although he did say to the undercover officer, I tried to kill myself after that so I didn't have to face any repercussions with anything. I thought it might be the easy way out. I don't want to be labeled a monster. In November 2020, at his trial after his confession, the defense counsel still tried to pin it on Helen, but fortunately, the Mr. Big operation was admissible. Court of Queen's Bench Justice Blair Nixon said, I find that Ivy's injuries did not occur as a result of a simple trip and fall. Rather, I find the severity of her injuries as well as multiple impact points can only be explained by an inflicted cause. I find that the Crown has established beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Bennett committed culpable homicide. So he was convicted of second-degree murder, which does carry an automatic life sentence and a minimum of 10 years before parole eligibility. But we had to wait quite a while to see what he actually got. Now, originally he was to be sentenced on April of 2020, but that was delayed several times. Once because he felt Dr. Riley Smith, who did his original psych assessment, didn't like him. In January of 2022, 2 years after his conviction, he still wasn't sentenced and was in isolation due to COVID, telling the court that he was still waiting for legal aid to appoint him a new lawyer. Finally, on January 11th of 2024, Justin was sentenced to a life sentence with no chance of parole for 15 years and has requested that his sentence be served in protective custody at taxpayers' cost, of course. No word on a decision from the justice on that matter at this time.